Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. On this episode, I welcome back one of my favorite guests on the pod, my good friend, Montreal-based Carl Boutet. Carl is a retail strategist, professor, and author of his latest, soon-to-be bestseller, Blind Spot: Navigating the Unseen Effects of Technology on Commerce. We discuss Carl's journey into academia, retail trends from the Big Show, NRF 2025 in New York, AI's evolving role, and the future of technology in commerce. Carl also shares insights on curiosity, innovation, and digital transformation. Carl, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast, my friend. How are you?
I am awesome. Feeling great to be back. What is it now? Trifecta, fourfecta, fifecta, but whatever the fecta, I'm happy to be here.
Get yourself a jacket, too, a smoking jacket.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
There you go.
To that. What happened to your husband? I'm surprised. Like I don't want to feel like I'm. The three amigos only can go so far here. I mean, we need to be careful. We're not stepping on anybody.
That's right. Well, as the three amigos, this is a two amigo interview. So Steve Dennis is actually on his way off to Transylvania or something, Bucharest or somewhere to do a keynote.
Well, we could go in so many places with that, but we'll just let it be.
I think last time we talked, let's see, geez, you were traveling a bit less. We were in Vegas, I think, last time we talked for the pod.
Yeah. So I was hoping from now on in that these would only occur in poolside cabanas with like nice little cocktails with those little umbrella things and lots of fruit. And I'd have to wear my sunglasses and feel cool. So I'm feeling cool, but not for the same reason. It's just because it's like minus 500 here in Montreal today. So
I was going to say typical Quebecer. You're thinking about it being a snowbird and getting somewhere warmer than you are today, for sure.
Oh, hell to the yes.
It is cold. Well, listen, we obviously, by the sounds of our chit and chat up front, we know each other quite well, but perhaps not everyone who's listening knows who you are. So who are you and what do you do for a living?
I am Carl Boutet, and I do several things for a living. I teach more and more. I write occasionally. I speak quite regularly, and I advise both at the executive and board level pretty consistently as well, too.
Now, talk about teaching for a little bit, because when we first met, you were not. You were oriented. I always thought you were oriented to have that kind of, the curious mind, and you've always had a very great interest in mentoring, whether it's directly or indirectly. What got you into teaching? And talk a little bit about that, because it takes you around the world, and it does tie into your book a little bit, because your prologue or entry in the book takes place in Vietnam. So talk about your teaching.
Yeah, I mean, it happened very, I guess, organically is the word. It wasn't the core intention of how I even began tying myself to the academic world. And we've spoken on a couple other episodes, I think, about the Retail Innovation Lab at McGill, how I got involved, basically helping them set that up and back in starting, I guess, 2017, 18 when the school was announced, and supporting the school from that moment on in. And then the pandemic, as my last book, we talked a lot about the great acceleration. Well, the pandemic was an acceleration into my academic career where I felt a little more comfortable maybe than some around going online and teaching online, which was the only way that could happen. And that sort of dovetailed well into my interests and my curiosity, as you put, I think is kind of core to all this around innovation and retail and technology, but not just for technology's sake, but how it plays into sort of the bigger strategy picture. So I got the opportunity, first to teach in the executive program, which wasn't just focused on retail. It was a broader sort of mini MBA program at McGill, and then for executives. And then the opportunity came to go specifically with the retail school to teach this first, as far as I'm aware of, emerging technology, and new business model course that is exclusively dedicated to the retail sector at a master's level. So I think that's a first in the world as far as I'm aware. So I've taught that now 3 times officially. So I'm on to my 4th in a couple of months. Excited about that. And then just this past semester, I was asked also to add digital marketing to that curriculum at the master's program still. And as you point out, along the way, actually, before I was teaching specifically at the retail school at McGill, at the Benson School, I did stumble upon this same opportunity in Asia through the Asian Institute of Technology, where I teach twice a year. Once in the spring, I teach, or early summer, I teach in Bangkok at their main campus, and then I've taught last 3 Decembers in their Vietnam partnership in Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi. So yeah, I mean, it's just kind of keeps on growing, and I appreciate you pointing out my interest in sort of mentorship, and I'm very I am very involved. Sort of anything that's kind of next gen, I'm really all about. So it ties really well into kind of what motivates me and supporting that that important generation that's coming in and has, I think, if we think our challenges are great, theirs, I think, will be that much more important. So yeah,
it feels like you went. It feels like you went from a program advisor, in other words, here's what I think you should teach, to, hey, I'd like to teach it myself, kind of thing, right? Like that feels like your evolution. And I remember you, me, and Sylvain Charlebois, Dr. Charlebois, talking all about. And he was like, "How do you like academia now?" You seem to do well with it, at least in the way that you're approaching it, which at the master's level and of course international and exotic places, but such interesting, like, everything. We talk about what's new, but go to Ho Chi Minh City and you'll find out what's, like really new, because they don't, what does Microsoft used to say, we just got such a big installed base, it's hard to do anything new. It's a fresh, clean slate by the time you get to Hanoi, right? They're just thinking in, and again, I'm kind of taking a lead from your book. I mean, it basically is like Steve Dennis often says to executives, well, if you had to design the business you had today, would you do it any differently? And of course, they all say, oh, yeah, it'd be completely different. Yep. Like department stores, it'd be completely different. Well, why aren't you doing that? But it strikes me as, if you had to approach business, digital, marketing, retail differently, how would you do it? And that seems to intrigue you quite a bit. I think, would you agree that you learn as much as you share in those markets?
Well, that's a secret that only you and I can keep here, Michael, because I think the reality is I probably learn even more. And Adam Grant, another decent academic, had a good quote about that this week, where he said, the best way to learn is to teach. So I definitely feel that way and feel that privilege, even, not here as well, because I come in contact with some really inspiring students that are bringing some really, their perspectives in North America, but obviously in Asia, it's all that much more different. And even between Asia, I often get asked about what's the difference. And the first thing I need to clarify is there's no such thing as Asia. It's the same way as no such thing as America, right? It's just like, which one are you talking about? Because they're different realities. And just between teaching in Bangkok and teaching in, let's say, Ho Chi Minh or Hanoi, I see there's some pretty big variations there as well, too, which are all inspiring. And to what Steve's point is around sort of getting away from legacy and being able to leapfrog technologies. Well, that's what we see. And in their case, especially in Vietnam, I mean, their proximity to China obviously has a big influence around how they sort of are structuring
and
things.
Their tremendous ascendancy as a manufacturing destination, as companies, everybody from Apple to Canadian Tire, pull out of, rely less on China. Vietnam is the net beneficiary, I think, of anyone on the planet, really. Mexico probably equally or less so, but the business that's flooding into Vietnam from a manufacturing is pretty. Just on a side note, the risk to that is, of course, that they will win in expertise, but also in the wage rates. Do you think that that's it's not a huge country, certainly not like China. Do you think they can keep up the momentum? Do you think they can absorb that kind of demand for manufacturing in a country like Vietnam?
They're being very strategic. So we're already seeing, let's say in the garment, they have a pretty strong base, but you can see like the low cost garment business is not setting up shop there. They're going to further south in Asia to find a place, exactly, where they can get that lower cost, because the middle class is nowhere near what we have in North America, but it's still it's quickly moving up. So they're trying to get more on the technology side. I mean, when I was there 2 years ago, and within the month that I was there, basically Jason Wong, NVIDIA, Tim Cook, they'd all come through, basically making big announcements about some of the setups. And even this past trip, there was some more more representations around those companies. I think if I got it correctly, Apple is basically moving the iPad production, and they have options. So like the iPhone, the latest iPhone's being made in India, the iPads in Vietnam. So it's they're spreading it out. And I think Vietnam is really trying to position themselves more in that specific technology light. And companies we see here now too, like VinFast, we don't talk much about them because we have trouble sort of understanding their role in the ecosystem. But I can tell you out there, their dominance is pretty impressive. So you'll start seeing some of that as well too. I think you'll see some Vietnamese sort of made and created products more and more too in telecom and some other things, but obviously still light years from China, but catching up quickly.
So you and I, we were talking off mic. We were both in New York for the NRF Big Show. We did not cross paths. More my fault of getting some stuff done behind the curtains. But I just wanted to just touch on what you thought about this year's show from the conversations you have. I mean, a little bit of what you hear on stage, but it's often more the conversations you have or the things that you see. What were your impressions of retail, and what were your takeaways from this year's Big Show?
So you're the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. I always wondered if I figured that out. I should have thought about that sooner. The conversations, for me, NRF is really is not so much about technology. It's about people and reconnecting with our community, really. So that's always the key takeaway for me. Just getting that face to face, and unfortunately, you and I didn't have that privilege this time, but I'm sure we'll have others soon. And then in terms of the technology, actually, what made this NRF special for me specifically is I brought my 18-year-old son along.
And I saw some pics of that. Right?
Yeah, and he's studying international business, so it's sort of his first business conference. So it was a doozy to bring him right out.
That's a big one to start with. Are they all like this? Well,
yeah, exactly. And his feedback, which I'm not scared to share with the vendors, is he's like, I get the impression everybody's doing the same thing. All I'm seeing is data and AI and data and AI and data and AI.
It's hard to parse, right? I mean, it's super hard to parse. It's like a giant, just flock. Everybody just flocks in the same direction, and boy, it's tough to sort out.
Yep.
What do
and I told them, I said, I think you need to understand a bit more about the dynamics of the business and ask a couple of extra questions, and you'll realize, hopefully how to differentiate, which is sort of my mantra about everything I teach and advise on, is how do you differentiate in a crowded market. And one of the first chapter in the book talks about the over-reliance on AI, and that sort of speaks to it, as everybody's going to kind of gravitate towards the sameness if they just think AI is going to differentiate them. But all back to the question about NRF, it's always great. New York's inspiring, and I have this. I usually now go every other year, but who knows, that could change. You like to I've never been to CES, and I know some retailers go, particularly who truck and trade in electronics. But, and I looked at the CES, and there was, I think Home Depot was speaking there. It doesn't have a very substantial retail track per se. Now, it is a show where you see a lot of tech, which of course is nascent in. And if you had to choose between those two, because they're coming together on the calendar, because the NRF Big Show is kind of trying to get away from Martin Luther King Day, MLK Day. Yeah. So they've backed it up even earlier. So they're now starting to collide. Whereas, you used to be able to go to both if you were ambitious enough to struggle to both. A lot of vendors, especially the tech vendors, you'd see them go from one to the next, and the CTOs. I think that's who you see there. CIO, chief, sort of the technology groups will be at the CES, and sort of the marketing and strategy groups will be more at NRF. So it's an interesting mix, and then sometimes they'll cross over. It's a good question. I know CES was working towards having sort of a dedicated retail pavilion and I knew retailers. There were some trips that were being organized. It was 4 retailers to go to the show. Last 2-3 years, I haven't heard so much about that, so I can't really speak to it. But I think it's indicative of of our industries overlapping more and more, where we're two colossal industries that have more in common than what differentiates us. So how will those ecosystems, another one of my favorite themes, sort of coexist and collaborate and come together to create shared value?
They're two just ginormous marketplaces. We had the opportunity to interview Rashad Tabakawala, who I know you follow as well, and he's coming up on Remarkable Retail. He's got a new book as well, and he just talks about the marketplace of ideas and the marketplace of different things. And the two conferences really have become about that, right? I mean, there's some people on the stage saying different things, but they're really big marketplaces for relationships and for content and for all those things. Now, let's get to your new book. So your second book, Blind Spot, Navigating the Unforeseen Effects of Technology on Commerce. What spurred you to write this book? What was your inspiration? What was that spark of inspiration that said there's a book that needs to be written, things need to be explained that aren't being explained today?
Well, it comes in sort of two parts. So, there's the first part, which is the prologue that you referenced briefly to earlier, and that happened that occurred in Vietnam, where I was teaching my first course in Hanoi, and during the week, basically, the ChatGPT blew up and became, public knowledge. Let's just say it was happening a bit before that, but not the same scale. And the story I share in the prologue talks about how this chief innovation officer from a large healthcare, one of the largest healthcare companies in Vietnam, basically is in the class, and we're talking about this emerging tool that we really don't know where it's going and how it's going to affect us. And during the break, he basically goes off and tries it, and comes back after the break and says, "I had it right. A prospectus, an internal memo of some form for me. I was curious to see what it would come up with." And I said, how did that turn out for you? He goes, "It did a really good job, probably as good as I could have, or close enough." I said, "Well, that's great, but now you still have the challenge of making that work in Vietnamese." And I was like, no, it did it in Vietnamese.
Incredible.
And that was like
epiphany, right? I mean, we all, I think, greater or larger around that time, I still just like the epiphany of, holy jumping, this is really, it's really good. Other than the odd hallucination that the thing has, they're pretty good, man.
Yeah, and exactly. And that's the big caveat that I always bring forward, the whole hallucination thing, which is less and less the case, but still important, and to bring forward. But anyways, all to say, so that was, for me, was kind of the beginning of Blind Spot in a lot of ways, where I've been studying and following close attention to technology, as you know, in general, and I actually studied. I did a certificate back in 2014 in data science, which we called big data back then at MIT, and been pretty close. I've tracking sort of the progress that the sector that we now sort of just loosely refer to as AI was doing over the last decade, and this one kind of caught me off guard. I was following some other LLMs, but I wasn't, nothing really was rocking the boat. And this one just kind of, punched me out of nowhere. And I got the same feeling that you might have had, the first time you used the BlackBerry, the first maybe wireless phone call you made, the first time you went into like a virtual chat room with people around the world.
You just got change everything kind of thing. First book you bought on Amazon in I bought it in 96, right? This could be something, we go. Right? Yeah.
This could be something. So that was it. And then, so it got me started thinking, like, what are the other technologies out there that we're maybe not paying close enough attention to, and especially in the follow-on, or I would call it, as I refer, the hangover from the pandemic or the Great Acceleration, the idea that we had to kind of restrict our perspectives and our moonshots, especially in around technology, because we just kind of went a little too far and wide because the pandemic just set this panic off that we were behind and we needed to catch up. So we went in all sorts of crazy directions, and I say crazy in the warmest of senses, because I think we need that. We do need that craziness once in a while to spur innovation, but all to say that the businesses now had to refocus. And what I've been noticing since the last 2 years especially, was this real resserrement or concentration to short term. And if it doesn't deliver next quarter or maybe two, we're not interested. And that exposes you to those proverbial blind spots again, where what is it that can come along? Now, I'm more in the technology sector, so that's what I can speak to more easily. But I also reference briefly in the book, the idea that as much as we're talking about technology, let's not just look at it for technology's sake. Let's think about it in the context of the broader actions out there that can catch us off guard too, with the climate change, God forbid, which we're seeing every day, impacting business, geopolitics as well, and everything in between, and more health related concerns out there too. So we got a hall pass, I like to say, during the pandemic, because nobody could really see or prepare for it. And the idea now is I don't think we're allowed to have that second chance. Then I don't think we'll get another hall pass if there's another major disruption that sort of impedes our ability to do business physically or digitally. So what are those blind spots? What do we need to pay attention to? How do we sort of prepare for what's best? And it's not there's no book on this topic that will solve all of those. And I self-publish and print these in pretty rapid succession, and this one came. I printed this one late November to bring with me to Asia, because that's where I did sort of the first launch in that classroom in Vietnam, where that first event occurred from the prologue. The idea is, I could have probably already add a chapter or two since then of things that I'm seeing. So it's more, you mentioned earlier, and the word, I think the key word here is curiosity. So I think the idea is how do we make sure that we remain curious, that we keep our blinders off? Doesn't mean we have to invest in everything. Doesn't mean we have to bet the farm on the next whatever. It's just more the idea that we don't shut it off either, and that we keep some energy and some resources available to at least explore different possibilities.
As I read through, and I want to get into a few other specific points in your chapters, but I often talk about or think about unintended consequences. And your book, I like the frame of the book, that these are some blind spots you may not be paying attention to, you may need to pay attention to. And what I like about it is it does have specific examples, but it's more cultural than like just pay attention to things that you don't, 100%. Day to day takes over your life. You've got to, whatever way it is, maybe it's listening to podcasts or going to conferences or whatever, you've just got to dedicate that time to see things that that are happening you may not perceive or maybe off your radar screen. And then these things have unintended consequences. Like you can start to build a ladder of, this is happening. It's supposed to do this, but it might also do this that I had no idea what happened. Let's talk about artificial reality. And, it was always for years and years, the tech that was coming and it was coming and it's going to revolutionize retail, which it plainly is not. But it's not to be I think some of these tech kind of come, they have their burst of moment. All the consultants say, you got to get on this. They make a bit of money and then it goes away. But it's kind of percolating in the background. And I think there's a connection and you make this connection between AI and AR and devices. And maybe it's not the Apple Vision Pro, but it's something. How do you think about this connection between the two? Do you really think retailers should be paying attention to this?
I think retailers need to be paying attention to all of these things. It doesn't mean they need to be investing all their energy in it. It just means that they need to be aware so that they don't get caught off guard when a moment arrives, like another ChatGPT moment. In this case, it won't be software, it'll be hardware. But let me just take a quick step back first, because you said something really interesting and important, and I'm glad you picked up on is, let me just disclose here that anything we talk about around technology is sort of secondary to culture. So I just want to sort of address that quickly and say that if you don't have the culture, technology is the easy part. Culture is the hard part. So as the famous Drucker quote goes, so about more in the context of strategy. But anyways, all to say that the book is more about the culture than the technology in some respects, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because we need to talk about technology, but it's all in the context of the ability of companies to make change. So, but to speak to the technology specifically and the the impacts, that these technologies like augmented reality, mixed reality, virtual reality, whatever you want to call it. I've been speaking for some time about the thickening digital layer, and that's the context how I see it, is this idea that we're getting more and more digitized. The path to purchase is what I teach, is getting more and more influenced by digital touch points, and it does not diminish the importance of the physical ones. If anything, it augments them, and
that seems to be what people get. When the buzz, the hype cycle was at maximum on the metaverse, but underneath it, there's a more interesting meta message, and I think that's what you're trying to get to.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm glad you're picking up on all these points, because that's definitely what I'm trying to convey. And I push back all the time too, is when people say, "Well, metaverse is schmetaverse," and I think that's a famous Michael LeBlanc quote I got there.
Steve Dennis. I'll give that one to Steve. I often repeat it as if it's mine, but I think
we all do that. I got the silos one that I like to use a lot too, being on farms from Steve. But there's an underlying concept, and it reverts back also to this question I love to ask whenever I speak, is like, how many people in the room think 5-10 years from now our lives are going to be less digital than they are currently? And I don't think I've seen a hand go up, or unless somebody was just about to ask a question, but that's about it. So it was speaking in sort of in that sense that we're going to, if our lives are going to become more digital, again, does not mean less physical. It just means there's going to be more digital influence, algorithms, accelerated obviously by, data science, machine learning, AI, God forbid. So that sort of naturally lends itself to, what is this digital layer that's going to be thickening around us, and how's that going to manifest? And is it AR? Is it mixed reality? I think we're already seeing it more and more. Like, I don't know about you, but I almost don't cross the street anymore without turning on my Waze. So that's an example of that digital layer, and there's contextual information that's being served to me that could obviously be augmented in different ways. Our challenge so far is the hardware. If you want to speak specifically to augmented reality, is we haven't cracked the hardware code yet. But Moore's law is still running, and the idea that the chips are getting smaller, more powerful, and cheaper.
Batteries, that's the problem, right?
Well, yes and no. There is technology that's getting us better and better, but that's probably one of the places, and we're a long ways from having these devices, being perfectly integrated in our lives without having the need for this supercomputer that we carry around with us in our pockets. But that it can become an extension of that. We're already seeing that with Orion, which is Meta's bet, and that's the place probably we should be paying the most amount of attention if you're interested in AR, as they're the ones that have put the biggest chips on the proverbial gambling. 15, I think, is the last count.
Amazon's in that game, like everybody's in that game.
Obviously, and
these guys are building nuclear plants to power all this stuff. Hey, let me ask you a question. So, there was a time, I'm going to give you a different technology and the outcome. So there was a time when people who were putting magazines and pictures and beautiful pictures of fashion and apparel, there was a time when they figured out they could manipulate those images to make them perfect and even more perfect than reality. And then there became a backlash against that, cultural and business. They said, you've gone too far. And let's call that the real movement came in, where it's like, I will win by saying these are not altered pictures at all. Now, I start to think about, is the same trajectory possible for AI? Because, I can pick out an AI picture and eventually it starts to write in a certain style, whether you're using Gemini or Chat or whatever. Is there and you're kind of hinting around this edge, right? That this thickening digital layer also has this counterbalance of, I just want to put all my devices away and go talk to people. The risk is, I'm kind of going in a couple of directions. The risk is people don't do that and we become this isolated society. Like, I'm not sure whose idea of society this is exactly. If we're heading down a path, you touch on ethics, if we're heading down a path, that everybody uses all these tools, and then all it's done is made us all be the same, using the same effective tools. And B, whose world are we really creating here? Like, people often say, boy, it would be great when you could do drone delivery. I'm like, I don't want 50 drones above my house delivering shit. Like, who wants that world? It's not me. Like, I'm asking, there's a question in here eventually, but basically you're trying to tie together ethics and competition at the same time. How deeply do you think about those three kind of moving pieces?
And governance.
Right. And I get that. That gets the point of who wants this stuff, right? Like, I'm sure you have the same experience. When I often interview people who launch this technology, handsets, they said, "Oh yeah, but I don't give them to my kids. Yeah, I don't want them to have it. I'm going to make it. Everybody else is going to have it, but God, no, I don't want my kids playing with this stuff because they'll turn out to be whatever. So how do you think about all this intersection of all this very complicated movement?
Well, I try to stay away from like broad generalizations other than the one about our lives becoming more digital. I think that's going to be, unless you really decide to go and live on a commune on a farm and really just sort of, and there'll be probably more and more of that.
I don't know.
Completely rejecting the whole notion. But I think just generally speaking, the way technology moves, I think there'll be more people embracing it. But I don't want to generalize and say that everybody's going to be 100% virtual. I think we know that's not the case. The challenge right now is this technology, this era we're entering. There's a lot of unknowns because we've never had a technology that has so much cognitive sort of ability, and I'll put that in big air quotes here. But it's all the other technologies have been very sort of practical and sort of productive, tied to basic productivity. I was listening to a podcast last night where they were talking about what the era where we went from the Connect phone, where you had to speak to somebody to get connected to somebody else by phone to the dial, and how that revolutionized, and it sent all these connection rooms went dark. Basically, all these people that would work in these
except on
places.
John Wick movies, apparently, it still works that way in John Wick.
Well, that's that. Yeah, well, and there we go. Maybe there is a John Wick world out there, but so I think it's around the speed of change right now, the progress, how culturally we can adjust to some of these, and I don't think everybody all at once is going to make a jump of any sorts. I mean, it'll happen more. It won't take 50 years like the rotary phone took to go away. I mean, it's gonna be faster than that. But I think as cultures will adjust, and for every trend there's a counter trend. So as much as we're going to have maybe a couple of drones flying around, which if you're living maybe in a more remote part, you'll be very happy to have, and maybe
good target
and it might not be in the air, it might be in the ground. Who knows how it'll manifest itself? But there will probably be more of that. But at the same time, you're going to really be looking forward to your Saturday drive to the farmer's market and go and right? touch and feel and smell and engage. Right. So there's no absolutes. I mean, we tend to, I think, divert quickly to binary and all this stuff and go, it's 1 or 0. And it's, life has taught us that everything tends to be somewhere in between. So let's focus on that, and then see how do we sort of make those two worlds come together in a way that's livable and governable, which is a bigger concern actually of mine. And the last chapter, as you point out, is around privacy and ethics and these things. So I want to make sure that those are addressed, and we don't forget those in the conversation. Even when I teach, I always have that come in, even though it doesn't need to be part of the curriculum. I want to make sure that the students have a sensitivity towards it, and remind them that they're going to have a bigger role and
a responsibility, really. Because the young folks you're teaching will become the decision makers and
100%
leaders of the future. All right, last question for you. So, you described, the book is written and immediately it's organic. You could add another chapter. Give us 1 or 2 or 3 pieces of advice in addition to getting the book. I'm going to ask you about that, about how retailers can keep up and avoid blind spots, or at least recognize what would they do? Should they go to conferences? Should they how do you practically, what's your advice when people ask you, how do I keep up and understand what matters and what doesn't?
We've already spoken about, I think the first piece, which is the curiosity, and wherever you get that information, and ideally it's harder and harder to get to not be caught into these echo chambers, but try to get out and find different places. I tend to open with the quote, "The future's already here and not evenly distributed," from Gibson, right? And where are those futures? They can be in other industries. They don't have to be necessarily your direct competition. I like to talk about how Amazon Go was pretty much created by Uber. And like it wasn't another retailer that had come up with that idea. So what are other industries that could inspire you and broaden your horizons? And obviously, what other geographies? Is it parts of Latin America that we should be paying more attention to? We don't talk, and we almost never hear about what's happening in Africa. We talk a lot about Asia, I think rightfully so, but there's other parts of the world, and even some parts of Europe and things that are doing some really interesting stuff. So curiosity and looking, trying to look beyond just the obvious of what my competitors are doing. So I think that's the first thing. Surrounding yourself with people that are just as curious as you are will accelerate your ability to see around corners and have, be it advisors around you, people you talk to casually or formally, and these can happen in conferences. These can be what you're hearing in your ears right now, with podcasts like yours, Michael, where you just kind of just. I tend to say the best things to listen to are the ones that you're expecting the least from, because you don't know who this person is. You don't know what they're talking, you don't know much about the topic. That's guess what? That's where you're going to learn the most. Yeah. And then last, I think it's just this idea of, I'm going to promote here education and the next generation tied together. But this idea of, speaking to, especially if you're looking to target these markets of new generation, speak with them, hear what they have to say. You said earlier, the metaverse. I mean, if you have a 16-year-old in your house who's in the basement 3 hours a day in that metaverse consuming, on whatever game that is, then you'll maybe have a different perspective and see that maybe they'll have an openness to some of these ways of navigating the world that we sure as heck don't have. So how do you find them? And the education piece that is sort of extends from that too. There's a lot of great education out there that can maybe also accelerate your ability to remain curious and see things that maybe others aren't seeing as clearly.
My guest is Carl Boutet, the wonderful Carl Boutet from, you and I have known each other a bunch of years. It's been such my pleasure. Your latest book is Blind Spot, Navigating the Unforeseen Effects of Technology on Commerce. Where can people buy the book and learn more about you and get in touch?
I have a pretty unique way of going about this. I'm maintaining, at least for now, the same strategy as the first book, so it's exclusively available through my channel. I haven't. I'm keeping the D2C playbook, which I'm sure our friend Steve will push back on me on, but I like maintaining that one-on-one. So it's studiorx.world is my website where you can purchase the digital version of the book. The physical version for now, I'm still keeping sort of for special events for friends like yourself, Michael, and sort of these one-on-ones and where I get to actually, pretty much either give the book directly in hand or send it with a warm note to somebody rather than just have a brown envelope show up from, God forbid, a mass merchant. So that's just my little way of going about it this time, but who knows, that could change in the future. So studiorx.world and Carl Boutet, I'm pretty easy, I believe, to find on those social networks, they say.
All right. Well, Carl, thanks so much for joining me yet again on the Voice of Real podcast. It's been a real treat to catch up, and I wish you safe travels. You are taking the responsibility of being an advisor to a group that I love, the RSPA. I was their advisor, and they were fortunate enough to get you on their board as an advisor. So I wish you safe travels and a great time with that group of very curious. You'll find them a group of very curious individuals. So listen, safe travels. We'll run into each other soon. Until then, have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, I got big shoes to fill there, Michael. So thanks for that opportunity. And yeah, looking forward to being with my friends from RSPA soon in warmer weather than where I am right now.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure and check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, Senior Retail Advisor, Keynote Speaker. If you want more content or chat, follow me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.